everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 300 library systems across the United States and Canada with the goal of making author talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the best-selling, prize-winning, and acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our Author Talk series year-round. Today, we are honored and so excited to host organizational psychologist, fun expert, and author Dr. Mike Rucker as he presents some important highlights from his book, The Fun Habit: How the Pursuit of Joy and Wonder Can Change Your Life. Before we jump in, though, let me pause, of course, to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then I will introduce our guest and turn things over to Dr. Rucker. We have compiled some viewer questions with registration, some pre-submitted viewer questions, but viewers can also submit questions during the presentation. So when you have a direct question, please just click that questions button that's right below the live stream video to submit your questions as we progress through the webinar. In addition, we invite you to interact with your fellow viewers in the live stream chat box. It's always fun to see where everybody's tuning in from. So for today, Dr. Rucker will present for the first 40 minutes or so, and then we'll hold an audience Q&A for at least the last 15 to 20 minutes of our hour. But please keep in mind there are quite a few of you tuning in today, and we will take as many questions as we can during the Q&A period. If you are unable to attend the full talk for any reason, you will receive a thank you for attending email in about 24 hours. And in that email, you can find a link to the recording. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today, Dr. Mike Rucker is an organizational psychologist and charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association, whose work has been published in the International Journal of Workplace Health Management and Nutrition Research. His ideas about fun and health have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Vox, Thrive Global, Mind, Body, Green, and more. Learn more at michaelrucker.com. Welcome, Dr. Rucker. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Going to turn things over to you now.
All right, well, let's begin. Let me start by conveying my gratitude for everyone attending today. I'm really glad to be here and to have you here, and really appreciate you being present. So they mentioned that I'm an organizational psychologist. That's by academic trade. My background is in from a research perspective in workplace wellness and looking at employee burnout. Professionally operate as a behavioral scientist for a company called Active Wellness. We primarily deliver fitness interventions to help people improve their well-being. I'm a charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association, which was founded in 2008. And I really share this, being a charter member, only to really let you know that I've been a fanboy of this positive psychology stuff now for quite some time. So why did I start researching fun, kind of juxtaposed to happiness? Fun as a topic of interest has some significant personal roots, but there are two primary reasons I believe my work is really hitting a chord lately, especially in the context of folks that are interested in positive psychology. One, we're awakening to an emerging understanding from a variety of sources that how we approach pursuing happiness, especially here in the Western world, has become problematic. That a relentless pursuit of happiness, especially that one that's marketed to us, kind of the good vibes only means, is actually often having the opposite effect. In fact, we now better understand that people who are overly concerned with being happy, so I'm not talking here about valuing happiness per se or wanting people to thrive, but habitually worrying about being happy, tend to be some of the most unhappy people. Two, the lack of fun, but maybe more broadly, leisure in general. And again, this is kind of specific to the Western world, highly correlates with the record levels of burnout we're seeing in most North American professions. So again, in my academic work, I looked at employee burnout, and I was specifically looking at physicians. And unfortunately, this is the worst year yet for them. At, I believe, 63% of physicians saying that they are burnt out. But you're seeing those large numbers across all vocations. The same way that sleep is finally now getting championed as a foundational aspect of our well-being after years of many hustlers, and I unfortunately fell into that category, wearing sleep deprivation as a badge of honor, we're now also learning that the same sort of reframing with regards to fun needs to take place. So in short, it's clear that many of us right now in modern, sort of work environments and modern life are fun starved, which is leading to negative consequences. Solving this problem is what the fun habit is about. So why are we so fun starved? There are so many reasons, and there isn't really enough time in the short amount of time we have together to cover any one of the reasons in rich detail. But one of the most obvious is how prevalent hustle culture here is in the United States. I clipped this, about Elon Musk that came out this week, but then just yesterday, I believe there was a headline story about Martha Stewart, mentioning something about our work ethic versus France. So you're seeing this from high net worth individuals about how they want everyone to work harder, and yet not enough empathy about the impact that it's having on us in general. And so that's not just, this idea of this pervasive normative issue that we're facing. With regards to just the bumper rails in general, too, we're the second worst country in the developed world when it comes to even providing paid vacation days. So United States employers on average only supply 10 days off for every year's worth of work. There's only one country below us in that regard, and that's Micronesia at 9 days off. So we're second to last. But arguably even worse than those statistics is that even though we're second to last in providing leisure to employees, only 50% of us are taking those meager days that we have available to us. So whether that's, again, the work ethic at play, or folks that are kind of stuck in the sandwich generation, taking care of both kids and aging parents, we really are a time poor society. And so there needs to be some things that we do to change that. And though the ideas from the fun habit are timely, the negative impact from a lack of fun is hardly a new idea. Again, similar to good sleep hygiene being a known pillar of health for quite some time, we've known for a long time that experiencing joy is also an important pillar of well-being. In preparing a recent talk for Cal State Chico this year, I found this article that you see on your screen from a vintage 1993 edition of their school newspaper. The story is essentially reporting the known consequences of a life devoid of fun and leisure. And so I use this to highlight that we know that we've been fun starved for some time and that it's bad for us, yet we've been socially conditioned for so long to believe fun should be deprioritized as adults, or we've been led to believe that fun is somehow unimportant, even though we all intuitively know how important fun can be. And also, I'm not trying to hide from the fact that for many of us, fun as an adult is difficult. Kids embrace fun naturally. Certainly my kids do. But as adults, many of us face at least one or more of these three obstacles. We're conditioned as we age to believe that trying to have fun is childish or even inappropriate. I mean, how often do you hear, even to aging children, act your age? We undervalue the mental and physical benefits of fun. So we don't quite understand how important fun is to really supporting both our physical and psychological well-being. And then sometimes we're just simply put off by the counterintuitive fact that fun for busy adults requires a little bit of discipline and pre-contemplation and planning. And so to kind of get going and engage in that often feels, well, not fun. So up until this point, we've kind of dug into the why, right, a bit. So now let's cover the what. What is fun? Kind of, to be able to progress, need a definition as we move along. And the academic definition of fun comes from the two-dimensional model of emotions you see here. Some scientists view emotions across two axes. There's a lot of debate now in psychology about whether this oversimplifies emotion, but it works with regards to a construct to define fun. So you will see on one level, on one axis, it being arousal. So that's essentially the energy that you get from the emotion. And then the other concept is valence, which is really just a fancy way of saying the pleasantness or unpleasantness of an emotional stimulus. So when we're able to get ourselves into a positively valent state, so on the right side of valence there in our model, we generally describe the experience as fun. So in the simplest terms, we can define fun as the engagement in pleasurable experiences. So fun is really the result of enjoying what we're doing. It's that simple. So I've been front loading this slide lately. I generally, in previous talks, have had it in the back, but I want to ensure that any skeptics out there don't jump off the webinar early. And so for any that may still be questioning the value of fun, I'm here to tell you that a productive life and a fun life are not in opposition of each other. Happily shifting time away from your work or creating a transitional ritual from work into leisure need not dampen your professional performance. In fact, taking time to engage in active leisure, in turn restoring your batteries and, finding times for renewal, not just with sleep, but actually reducing your cognitive load, makes you more productive. When we do this, we do better work and we get better results. And this isn't just conjecture. Again, it's been studied. So the primary reason for this is the so-called hedonic flexibility principle. And it turns out to be true that when we're not having fun, when we're kind of living a life devoid of joy, we do seek out poor forms of escapism to make ourselves feel better. But the surprise in studying this phenomena is what happens when we feel like our life is full of fun. So in a landmark study of how people spent their time, a team of scientists from Harvard, Stanford, and MIT looked at the how and the why people choose their everyday activities. And this wasn't a small study. This was actually quite a big study. The study included a large sample of more than 28,000 people. And the conclusion of the study found that unlike people who don't enjoy life, people who felt good about how they were spending their time were more likely to choose useful activities at a later point that weren't necessarily mood enhancing. So for example, they might forgo a little bit of whimsical fun later to sit down and write a book about it. Or maybe that's just me, but you get the point. What all this suggests is that when our fun cup is full, we can resist the allure of short-term gains because these types of rewards are already bountiful through deliberate design, and invest in long-term enrichment goals that support our existence. However, when we are simply trying to cope or we're burnt out, we're more likely to seek out unhealthy, untethered escapism. And so again, the paradox goes is that the folks that are taking time off the table for themselves are the ones that are the most productive and are actually the ones thriving at work. But in this particular study, and again, some of this work has been replicated, I think a fascinating second part is these people are also the ones that are trying to find hard challenges. So some of them look for it at work. They have a lot of ambidexterity, and they're looking for more exciting things to do, so they progress through the levels of meritocracy faster. But then some find it outside of work, and so these folks are the ones that have set up the stage for transformative experiences because they're actually seeking them out because they have the vigor and vitality to do so. So now we're armed with the understanding that fun isn't simply a nice to have. It really is an important piece of both our psychological and physical health. So let's get into a set of tools that enables us to have a bit more fun. I would like to introduce all of you to the SAVOR system, which is detailed in chapter 3 of the Fun Habit. In short, SAVOR lives as an acronym that brings together a group of helpful tools we can use to bias our actions towards more fun. So the first letter S represents story editing. And I first learned about story editing in the book Redirect by Dr. Timothy Wilson. Wilson's book explores the significant power our beliefs have in shaping our subjective well-being. As Wilson explains, people and all of us possess the ability to edit personal stories in a way that lead to sustained changes in their behavior and well-being. Story editing is this useful tool that can help us correct the faulty mindset that fun is foolish and a poor use of time. In fact, simply becoming aware that these inhibitions exist in us and committing to living life more joyfully is often half the battle. With practice, story editing can also help turn mundane circumstances into opportunities for joy, simply by giving ourselves the mandate to enjoy fun as an act of radical self-care. So, to begin the process of story editing, start by examining any lingering prejudice you may have about fun. Do you think it's whimsical? Do you think it's a waste of time? In particular, remind yourself that having fun and being a high functioning adult are not mutually exclusive. Fun isn't extra, it's a vital component, just like sleep, of your personal well being. Fun needs to be woven into your identity in that context. And this redirection of your personal narrative is a first step to gaining your power back and letting go of some of those old scripts that might be holding you back. Part of why this is important is that producing pleasurable thoughts on command takes some deliberate practice. So show yourself some grace and be patient with yourself. In fact, science suggests that for many of us, the simple act of trying not to focus on our worries can be draining. In one experiment conducted by Wilson and his colleagues from the University of Virginia, when given a choice between 15 minutes spent sitting and thinking with their own thoughts or enduring a painful electrical shock, 2/3 of men and 1/4 of women took the shock. Further research out of the University of Virginia revealed that when we aren't mindful, we don't prioritize pleasurable thoughts. And it's probably because we tend to underestimate how enjoyable and beneficial such thoughts can be. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of this particular research thread, there also seems to be some evolutionary reasons for them, but that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers. So what we do know from Barbara Fredrickson's work and others is that when we are able to prioritize the ideas of having fun and fun in the future, it really can be beneficial and a good way to support good mental hygiene. Successful story editing also helps us develop a growth mindset, a concept introduced by researcher Carol Dweck in her book Mindset. So Carl found that people with a growth mindset have an enhanced sense of agency, and they tend to see themselves in the driver's seat of their lives. So they truly actualize the autonomy and agency they have over their domain. They believe that they can have a positive impact on improving themselves and their situations. Without a growth mindset, we see our abilities as fixed attributes and our lives as essentially out of our control. So to adopt a growth mindset, especially in the context of the fun habit, reinterpret negative occurrences in a way that promotes improvement. So for example, if you face maybe rejection or you've made a mistake, choose to think, you know what, this was a good challenge. The next time, maybe I'll do it differently and I'll try and have more fun along the way. And that's in contrast to folks that potentially approach it with a fixed mindset where any interpretation of a setback is the final word. That wasn't fun. I must not be good at this. I never want to do it again. So I want to be clear here. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. There's certainly going to be things where they really do suck, and we're not going to reframe them in a way that's unhealthy. But for a lot of minor inconveniences, oftentimes you can see the delineation of someone's mindset of essentially getting through it by making it a little bit more pleasurable rather than not approaching it ever again because difficulties trying to find a way of making it fun a second time. So I'm admitting that sometimes this sort of radical reframing can prove difficult. And if it does prove difficult for you, I suggest start small. Simply tell yourself that your upcoming weekend is a vacation. This is a tip of the hat to a UCLA researcher, and we'll talk about her a little bit later, Dr. Cassie Holmes, who did this study. She found that just simply setting this intention, this small mindset shift, has been shown to have a huge positive impact, delivering some of the same psychological benefits of an actual vacation without doing anything else. And so the belief is that it's essentially an act of mindfulness, but also reminds us we have agency and autonomy with regards to those breaks, away from our work. And so once you experience the tangible benefits of this small mindset shift by trying this yourself, you'll begin to feel empowered to try larger ones. And I've seen this time and time again. And as you practice this tool of story editing, you'll start to see other opportunities for fun where you never have before. So for instance, you can treat your lunch hour as a true break. Actually take that time back instead of eating lunch at your desk and use it as an opportunity to do something fun, like reconnect with an old friend over a meal. I was actually, giving this presentation recently, and someone from the audience came up to me and said, I just don't have, because of life circumstance, I don't have the ability to take holidays anymore. But you know what? Damn sure I can still take hol hours. And so I have already been doing this. Anytime that I have an hour, I make sure that I actually use that break for something that's enjoyable to me. And so I think that's a good example of, how powerful this type of reframing can be. The second letter in SAVOR is A, and A stands for activity bundling. Activity bundling is a kind of magic. It adds more hours of fun to your week without the need to add more hours. It's a process of examining how you spend your time and incorporating other positive elements into moments that might otherwise be underutilized. Of course, there are foundational activities. We've already kind of talked about sleep. If you have a meditation practice, you certainly don't want to bundle additional activities to it. Time dedicated for unstructured thought that could be harmed by using this tool. But done carefully, activity bundling can transform many of life's most mundane or difficult moments into more enjoyable experiences. So the simple practice of bundling activity also increases the number of opportunities that you might have for fun in any given week. So for instance, you could combine catching up with an old friend with a trip to the museum, if that's something that you like. Or you could combine a mundane chore like supervising your kids' activities with something more fun. So an example that I often give is I found myself essentially having to take my daughter to a gymnastics class where I would sit on the bench for an hour and just kind of scroll through my phone. The first few weeks I really did enjoy it, the novelty of getting to watch my daughter master a new skill. And I should mention she was 4 or 5 at the time. But then I realized it was really not a good use of my time. And I certainly wasn't having fun after watching, maybe the 200th somersault. So I realized, why don't I join her in the fun? I meant really the goal of that particular initiative for my wife and I was to get her active and, build some agility. So I found a dance instructor that would still create moves that were appropriate for developing her fitness and for my own, to be quite honest, because I was rehabilitating a hip injury at the time. And so I exchanged that 1 hour where essentially I was sitting on the bench by bundling 2 activities, dance classes and rehabilitating my hip. And so instead of wasting that hour, which essentially, started to bleed week after week, I now have these amazing memories with my daughter. So I use that as one example. Obviously, your life circumstances are going to allow you to be creative and however you feel fit. But if you, give it just a little bit premeditation, a lot of these activities that we find boring, we generally can change our circumstance, especially by adding elements to it. Another approach is to bundle activities in succession to reward yourself for an activity you want to get done but don't find pleasurable. So behavioral scientists have long understood that pleasurable activities are a strong motivator to perform unpleasant ones. I think any parent inherently knows this. Hey, if you clean your room, I'll take you to the movies. But this can also work for adults. It's a common form of activity bundling, especially now, I think, with the popularity of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, called temptation bundling. So essentially, temptation bundling helps us use fun to get the hard stuff done. And so some examples might be only listening to audiobooks that you really enjoy or a podcast you really enjoy when you're doing some sort of housework or domestic work. I'll tell you, I do this. I confess I really like 90s rap, but I can't listen to it in earshot of my young children because of the profanity. So I only generally listen to it while I'm doing yard work, which I don't necessarily enjoy all that much, but now I really do look forward to it because it's also paired with this activity that I don't engage in otherwise. Another can be rewarding yourself afterwards after you complete an arduous task. So another example from my own life, I allowed myself to go to a comedy show only after I completed my taxes. So that's kind of like a straw man setup, but it really did, was this agreement I made with myself that I wasn't going to go to the show if I didn't get through, this kind of agonizing task. The V in savor represents variable hedonics. And so quite simply, variable hedonics really just serves as an acknowledgement that variety really is the spice of life. And this is an assertion backed by a lot of science. So when our lives become too routine, time passes more quickly in our perception. And variety, a break from that routine, slows time's perceived passage. In fact, simply by attending closely to what you're doing, being mindful of something you usually automatically do, you can stretch your perception of time. And so a common example is, if you're someone that commutes to work, do you remember all 100, commutes to work? Or do you remember how you got to work? And then you likely go, oh, and I've probably done that about 100 times. The same way that if you had 100 copies of a magazine, you wouldn't keep all 100 copies, most likely. You would get rid of 99 and then remember that you had one of them. And then you have this memory of that one magazine. So as we add variety, we encode more information in our brain that, again, allows us to feel that we've had more time in the corpus of our lives. Routine experiences typically escape our memories because habitual behavior has that effect on our brains. And so as such, we perceive them as happening a lot more quickly than they do. A highly regarded research study out of Hebrew University of Jerusalem conducted 6 experiments on the influence of routine on people's estimation of time. And all 6 studies, people estimated the length of routine activity as shorter than a non-routine activity of the same duration. And with regards to cognitive science, what we're learning is when we add this type of variety, it really does lead to something called cognitive reserve, because we're encoding more information in our brain and we're creating more neural pathways. And the belief is that as we develop more of these neural pathways with novel experiences, it really could potentially protect us from cognitive decline. So this isn't just about having more fun, but it really does have a significant health impact as well. But it's not just about the health impact. When we fill our lives with fun and novel experiences, we really enjoy ourselves, whether that's through the act of learning new skills or traveling to new places, whether that's staycations where we're learning our intimate environment, or where we have the privilege to go out to exotic new places. Meeting new people is a great way to kind of flex variable hedonics. And then trying new activities. For me right now, my current jam is cooking classes with my kids. And so I've never been a great cook, but experiencing that, especially through the giddiness of the way a child approaches it, has been really fun for me, and developing a skill that I've never had. And we know that when we do all of this, when we create rich tapestries with regards to the things that we do, we look back on life in general with greater satisfaction. And this has been shown both in quantitative research, but also qualitative research as well. For anyone that's familiar with Bronnie Ware's work, the 5 regrets of the dying. I mean, if you look at the 3 top regrets, it's essentially folks that didn't find the time to implement, a fun habit in their own lives. The O in savor stands for options. And there are plenty of opportunities for serious fun available to anyone willing to put in a bit of work. Since our goal is more fun, we want options. And when we have access to better options, we tend to make better choices. And this isn't just with regards to our fun habit. It's just really, a phenomenon that happens in general in all aspects of life. So a great way to brainstorm more fun options is to use a accessible coaching practice called the 5 options technique. It's essentially exactly how it sounds. You simply push yourself to come up with 5 new options for fun, activities you're not currently engaged in that are realistically doable in the coming weeks and months. So, just to throw out some ideas, it might be going to a movie with an old friend that you haven't seen for a while, or taking a course on something interesting. So, that's really accessible now in the internet age. Udemy courses are really reasonably priced. There are a lot of great free courses on Coursera, or maybe picking up a neglected hobby. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, you can see in the background there. my guitar. So I just recently picked that back up to my delight, maybe not the delight of my wife, because I'm still getting back to where I used to be. But there are all sorts of different ways to, ideate what you might put in play that's either never been there or was there that you want to integrate back. So once you've built some solid options, I challenge you to identify one that you can immediately attempt. If you have a hard time choosing one from your list, visualize how that option would make you feel. Again, kind of, experience the valence that it brings up. And then pick the one that really speaks to you, but use some tools from behavioral science and also pre-commit to it. Even better if you bring a friend along. We know that once you put something on your calendar, it has a much higher propensity of getting done. And that social agreement you make if you invite a friend along as well means it almost for sure will happen. So again, pick that one thing if you're looking for some advice to immediately put into action, and better yet, invite a friend along. The last letter of savor is reminiscing. It's the last tool that we'll go over with regards to this model. Reminiscing is a way to extend the value of fun, really give the fun that you've already had more power. The benefits of gratitude are well established, right? But gratefully reminiscing about our fond memories is gratitude on steroids, employing a form of appreciation known as dispositional gratitude. And so dispositional gratitude is pretty easy to understand. It's really just characterized by an appreciation of others, because most of our fun is a connection to others, or at least to something that we care about. It's an appreciation for simple pleasures. So really just, enjoying things that are accessible to us, and then understanding that these things are abundant. So again, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here, certainly not trying to, get in the way of anyone's emotional flexibility. But I think as much as there's an abundance of terrible things out there, there certainly is an abundance of fun and good things out there. And so knowing that, we can use our agency and autonomy to begin to steer the ship that way, even though there still will be slings and arrows that come our way throughout life. A great way to reminisce that we don't do enough is celebrating our wins. And this has been studied by a behavioral change expert, BJ Fogg, a social scientist I really admire from Stanford, who urges people to embrace the superpower of being able to make yourself feel good in any given moment. Fogg emphasizes the importance of celebrations in this quote. In my research, I found that adults have many ways to tell themselves, I did a bad job, and very few ways of saying, I did a good job. And you don't need a manager or a boss or a client to recognize you. You can find a colleague or a friend or a loved one to celebrate meaningful, authentic milestones with you, both big ones and small ones. Who you celebrate with doesn't really matter so long they take the celebration to heart. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a prized artifact of mine. It was given to me by a writing buddy. His name is Ryan McFadden. If you like short stories, he's an amazing short story writer. And he gave it to me when I told him that the manuscript for The Fun Habit had finally been purchased. It's a big marble sign of the Horns trophy that says kick ass on it. So obviously it's been customized to my tastes. And it may sound silly, but having a fellow writer that I really admire gift me with this physical object freed me to celebrate something that otherwise was pretty intangible. And so for any other writers out there, this kind of stuff, getting to connect with you guys is really exciting for me. And it's been a fun sort of, result of the book going to market. But when you sell the manuscript, this years of work, the publisher kind of moves on. And so you've essentially almost finished. There's certainly a big hiatus between delivering the manuscript and when it goes to market. And you're there left by yourself. You did all this hard work. And so what Ryan did was allow me to go, wow, I did it. And so this thoughtful trophy made it possible for me to celebrate that moment, because it made me realize someone else is seeing it. But then it also gave me this tangible sort of artifact that every day when I look at it, I'm able to reminisce about the win and relish that feeling all over again. So this isn't rooted in science. I know most of the tactics and strategies I've given you, I generally try to give you the source. But what I found is if you want to be celebrated, if you're someone like myself that likes a pat on the back and that makes you feel good, start celebrating others. You will find out quickly that that positive energy that you flow out inevitably flows right back to you. So again, celebrate more. So that's a quick review of Savor, but I did want to touch on a couple more important aspects of fun. First, I want to highlight that we've come to understand that fun is an underrated yet integral part of creating lasting healthy habits. Those familiar with Charles Duhigg and James Clear's work know that our habits are made up of a prompt, the routine or the behavior of the habit, and a reward. And the prompt is the trigger that initiates our habit. The routine is the behavior itself. And then the reward is the positive outcome that reinforces the habit. The key to habit formation is really understanding and manipulating these components to create a loop that strengthens over time. Another equally important concept regarding habits, again, comes from B.J. Fogg and his behavior model. And this model asserts that for a behavior to occur, three elements must be present: motivation, ability, and then again, this prompt, right, that kind of gets us to act. So in other words, we need to be motivated to perform the behavior. If we don't care about it, we generally won't do it. Have the ability to do it, because if we can't do it, we won't do it. And then this prompt to take action. So how do these two models come together to suggest that incorporating fun can help us develop healthy habits? By integrating fun into our habits, we increase that motivation and it reinforces the behavior. And when the behavior and reward start to blend, we make the habit loop more satisfying and enjoyable. And this tends to lead to stronger habits over time. Often our habits will fail because we've overprescribed on this idea of delayed gratification. And so there is no real reward at the end. It's something out in the future state that we can't really even actualize. So when the journey isn't fun along the way, our motivation tends to falter and the habit will eventually fail. A great example of this using fun successfully for healthy habits comes from actor and fitness enthusiast Terry Crews. And so a lot of us were first introduced to Terry when he was doing those bizarre and wonderful Old Spice commercials. He's been in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I believe, I don't watch the show, but I believe he's a current host of America's Got Talent. And you can tell, if you're not familiar with him, he's got a pretty good physique. And so it shouldn't surprise you that he gets lots of people asking them how they can get into exercise. And so in addition to being a funny guy, Terry also gives great behavioral science advice. And this is how he answers the question: treat the gym like a spa. Yes, it has to feel good. I tell people this a lot. Go to the gym and just sit there. Read a magazine and then go home. Do this every day. Go to the gym. Don't even work out. Just go. Because the habit of going to the gym is more important than the workout. Because it doesn't matter what you do. You can have fun. As long as you're having fun, you will continue to do it. And so often you see folks, weekend warriors, go hard those first couple of days. There is no reward. What they're rewarded with, 24 to 48 hours later is their whole body is sore. They can't feel their legs or whatever it is. And they're not going to habituate that behavior. So this is really good advice. And again, there are generally three attributes you can experiment with. And I talk about this in the book because, again, my day job's in fitness. It's the activity itself, the environment, or the people that you do it with. So if you hate gyms, then get yourself out of the gym. Maybe take hike in nature or environments that you love. If you don't like walking or running, which is true for me now that I have a hip replacement, then get yourself, into an activity that you like. For me, I found myself loving Peloton, and now that's my habit because, again, I've admitted that I really like, high energy music, and I really do enjoy the instructors, and so it's a fun experience for me. And then, the people that you do it with. We see that group exercise has some of the least attrition because, a lot of it is not about the exercise at all. You almost forget that you're exercising because the tribe of people that you are now interacting with is what really draws you to that activity. So before we jump into Q&A, I want to really quick introduce the play model as well, which is a simple but powerful tool to liberate some of the time in our calendar. You may have been encouraged to look at your calendar for productivity in the past, but now I'm asking yourself to permit yourself to see time through clear eyes. independent of beliefs and priorities that might have driven your decisions in the past. And so it's a 4-quadrant model. We're going to go through each quadrant here fairly quickly. The pleasing quadrant is in the upper right, and these are really activities that are easy for us to do and are really enjoyable. There are moments of joy and delight that punctuate our day-to-day life. And only you are going to know what these activities are, but just to give some examples, it could be catching up with a friend, unstructured play with children and pets, personal hobbies, things like that. And even though activities in this quadrant are often viewed as frivolous, science tells us they're anything but. While completing his doctoral work at Harvard University, a researcher who's now made quite a name for himself, but this was his doctoral work at the time, a gentleman by the name of Matthew Killingsworth, found activities associated with momentary happiness are also associated with greater life satisfaction. So even though these things tend to be short-lived in duration and they don't really require much investment from us, when compounded, they really contribute to that elusive feeling that most of us are looking for, that life is worthwhile and fulfilling and we feel content. So momentary fun, therefore, is a very important fixture of our menu of activities. The living quadrant is meaningful fun that's sometimes experienced outside of our comfort zone. So we can relish the moment, after once we get back into the comfort zone. This includes experiences like mastering a new skill, tackling an invited challenge, or doing something exhilarating. Some of you might know the concept of type 1, type 2 fun. This isn't my idea, but it kind of was made popular by REI. And so the idea is type 1 fun are things that we enjoy, and type 2 fun are things that we don't enjoy in the moment, but when we look back at them, we really do actualize them as being fun. So for those that are familiar, you might look at the living quadrant as type 2 fun. But these are things that we couldn't engage in all the time because they do take effort, but the payoff is significant because these are peak experiential activities, triggered by challenge or risk, physical exertion, natural wonder, rich insights, or potentially a spiritual practice. And so these are the things that might not be, in our weekly lives, but we really want to make sure that we have some in our schedule because they're transformative, right? And so for those looking for states of transformation, we really need these types of opportunities for growth. The next quadrant, and you'll find this in the bottom right, again, are I call these agonizing activities, and these are things that are challenging to execute, so they take a lot of energy, and they really bring us little to no joy. So it's fair to say that life is not meant to be all fun. I'm certainly not here to preach that. Most of us have joyless work and unpleasant tasks that just have to get done to lead a meaningful life. So again, like most of these lists, the agonizing list is going to look different for each one of you, but examples might include, really hard work, intellectual work, potentially personal responsibilities, domestic responsibilities, and other obligations. Like, again, my example of doing taxes. But when you're able to be mindful of these, oftentimes there are components, again, looking at those 3 constructs of, how you do it, the environment you do it in, or the people you're doing it with, where you could potentially make them more pleasurable once you look at them critically. And this next suggestion, I always admit, does come from a place of privilege, but oftentimes there are ways to outsource things, in an economic fashion where you can quite literally get rid of the agonizing activity, which will give you room to replace it with something that you might enjoy more. And then the last activity type is yielding. And so for some people, most of all of their leisure time is going to be spent in this category. And these are activities that are easy to execute, but don't add much value to our lives. Often they simply just pacify us. So these could be things like mindless social media use or TV channel surfing. It might even be friendships of convenience or social gatherings that you go week after week. And because you haven't thought about it critically, you realize they're just not that enjoyable anymore. So we spend a lot of time thinking of affluence in a financial sense, but we spend so little time thinking about time affluence, which is really a fancy way of saying the ability to have autonomy over how we spend our time. So for these reasons, our work with the play model starts by valuing our time and seeing where we can reasonably take things off our plate. In the fun habit, I suggest doing a simple time audit of 168 hours. That's 1 week's worth of work of activities. So, excuse me, 1 week's worth of activities to get a better sense of where your time goes. The exercise really only takes 7 days. We're about to wrap up here. So in a couple slides, I'll provide you a link where you can download a time auditing exercise to help you understand where your time goes, as well as a link that goes further into the play model in a little bit more depth. So once you've cleared the clutter a little bit using that exercise, then the fun really begins by exploring and inviting more fun things back in where you created some space. And this isn't simply about having more fun, although that's certainly one goal. It's also a good ongoing practice because often when we do get space, we have a tendency to fill it back up with busyness or easy activities that would fall in that yielding category. We know from behavioral science that when we try to change normalized behavior, we're much more likely to be successful if we replace our old habits with a better choice. A well-known example in this area is interventions that encourage smokers to chew gum during routines where they would have otherwise smoked cigarettes. The people that replace smoking with chewing gum have much higher success rates than those who are encouraged to quit but aren't nudged into a replacement activity. So once we've created you some space, let's just make sure that it's filled with some real fun. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. I was really humbled by the size of the audience today. I want to thank you for being here. It's chaos out there, especially now. There's so much. So please do remember to be kind to each other, but also please remember to have fun because it's important. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rucker. That was so much illuminating information about fun, and we have a ton of questions. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a little while so people have time to get the link down. But our first question is from Amy asking, how do you differentiate between a fun habit, a lazy moment, and whether or not procrastinating is a sign of disinterest versus grit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think certainly there's times, where you get to define what's pleasurable, right? So there are a couple things to unpack here. One that I often like to highlight is that oftentimes here in the West, we're really marketed high arousal things as fun. So I'll get people that come to me and say, well, I'm just no fun. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, I don't like to go to rock concerts. I'm like, okay. And they're like, I'd just much rather, read a book poolside and not have anyone around me. Well, by our definition of fun, right, which again is grounded, if that's pleasurable for you, you are having fun. And so these ideas aren't my own. They come from Jeannie Tsai, a researcher out of Stanford. But we have kind of been led to believe, right, that fun has to be these boisterous activities. And so that's just simply not true. Like oftentimes you can use that story editing tactic to go, you know what, I am a fun person. My fun is just not the way it's being marketed to me on Instagram. The second piece with regards to, displacing discomfort, I think that is where you need to be careful. So, it's a little bit geeky in the weeds, but we know that oftentimes if we're in a negative valent state, so essentially we're just bored, we can trick ourselves by alleviating that negative valent state into thinking that we're doing something fun. This is, where we villainize social media use quite a bit because, essentially we're just sitting there and scrolling and we're not getting any value of that. But we might trick ourselves into thinking it's fun because it's alleviated that pain of boredom. It's gotten us out of that negative valent state. So you need to be careful there. And so a couple litmus tests that I use is one, are you encoding information, right? If I were to ask you, how were you spending that time a week from now? And you couldn't tell me at all because your brain didn't actualize it as important, then it's probably problematic, right?
That's interesting because sometimes people ask me what I do over the weekend and I can't remember. So I don't know what that says about my fun. Okay. So I guess kind of taking the low activity fun in mind, Julia is saying regarding TV and movies, does it help to watch more comedy and less drama for fun?
So again, I would go back to that litmus test, right? Are you enjoying it? Is it something that if I were to ask you in rich detail, would you be able to tell me about it and reminisce about it in a way that would make you smile? So I think if you have a predisposition to comedy and you find that pleasurable, then sure, you might want to bias towards that. I do have a predisposition to wanting to hear comedy because it puts me in a good mood. But I will say that the most enjoyable TV for me has been both Lost and Ted Lasso, which both, Lost because of the philosophical ideas. And I could tell you essentially, it had a lot of seasons and I could, unpack it because I remembered most of it. And it was also a pro-social behavior because I got together with other geeky friends and we would unpack the episode. And I'm finding the same now with Ted Lasso. My elk tends to like positive psychology, and Ted Lasso has so much of that baked in that a couple of friends have actually done a podcast about it, and certainly love talking about all of the Easter eggs within that show. And neither one of those are really comedy, although I would still call those quite fun. And I would like to layer on for anyone listening, like I don't villainize watching television. Again, if you're enjoying that time, and you can think back at it and go, yes, that was a good use of my time, then that should certainly be part of your fun habit.
That's definitely, I put on the TV when I'm cleaning. Like you were talking about those activities that you have to get done that aren't necessarily fun. It's definitely TV or a podcast for me. So a couple of people have pointed out that while there's no specific target age for this book, have you considered creating a version specifically geared toward teenagers, young adults, or children, or retired folks?
So I do have a bonus chapter. It's getting refined, certainly for the aging well. And then I think, it's interesting how much we are in flux with regards to Gen Z, right? And so I've certainly contributed to others' work, but the attention economy that they are faced with, and the competition, right, for what they believe is fun is so complex. That's probably for a different thought leader, to be quite honest. But I think the best advice I can have for parents that are worried about that is to try and integrate things that you co-create together. So certainly my own children, my children are 11 and 8, are succumbing to a lot of tempting devices that pull in, that were developed, quite frankly, by a behavioral scientist smarter than myself to capture their attention, right? And generally, we now know that it is creating those negative valence states, and not to get deep into the weeds because there is some rich research, but then also a lot of discourse and debate about how true that is, because some of it's done kind of in a reductionist setting. But what I will say is that if you want to get your kids active, understanding what they want to do and then matching that with your own interests and going and engaging in it can be a really useful way to help them develop their own fun habit. And so it can be something, what I do a lot is take classes with my kids, because then this comes from, again, not to geek too much on the psychology, but transactional analysis. When we're trying to teach our kids something, oftentimes we'll think it's fun, but it's really this, we're the teacher and the kid's the student. So it can sometimes dampen the fun because the kid gets in this mode that, like, okay, because they have an affinity for you as a leader and they look up to you, they're really trying to learn something. But if you both get into a setting where someone else is the teacher, then it can be, just as fun, and it can still be the same sort of path to mastery. But now if you make mistakes, you can laugh at each other and villainize somebody else, rather than one of you yelling at each other. So I find that a great way to kind of get kids engaged. Another friend is developing a gardening habit with their kid because their kid loves pizza. And so they were, making an herb garden. And so, they have really a lot of fun creating this garden for each other. And then they get to use that produce to make pizzas, which is something that the child really wanted to do. So again, you're going to need to get creative based on your own preferences. But there's so many ways to do that. And especially, if your consideration is how do I, get kids away from screens, I think you co-create those opportunities with them.
Mhm. Kind of on that same vein, with teaching, Brian is saying, how can high school teachers build more fun into the school day? Would it require a massive overhaul of the system, or can small changes to our current system get us there?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of amazing work in this area. I've leaned heavily on a researcher out of Cornell by the name of Dr. Caitlin Woolley. So for that particular individual, I would say look up her name. And so what they found is how using concepts of activity bundling, how can you add components to the elements of learning so that the kids are more engaged? So not necessarily circumventing the learning module per se, but perhaps doing it in a way that opens up the breadth of interest of the kids or adds elements that keep it more interesting. And they're doing a lot of amazing work in this area. Fishbach is another amazing researcher in this area, but it's clear that we're able to, just like I showed in the healthy habits slide, when we're able to add components where kids aren't essentially, becoming martyrs, right? Like, you just need to get through this. The same sort of Protestant Puritan work ethic at play that's sort of been an underlining theme, of this webinar is sort of at play at schools too, right? So finding creative ways to circumvent that so that you're increasing, especially with waning attention spans, the ability to pull kids in, and just be careful that it's not too biased towards extrinsic rewards. I don't want to ramble on about this, but anyone that's read Daniel Pink's Drive knows that we want to make sure that any fun intervention is really rooted in intrinsically motivating them to do the work rather than some sort of, trophy or reward at the end, which can have kind of interesting and sometimes negative impacts on people's learning.
Okay, thank you. Nancy's wondering, can you overschedule too many fun activities and then have it backfire and cause you stress? Wondering, is it better to take the fun in moderation approach?
Yes, absolutely. So there's been some amazing work. I think I already, I gave a tip of the hat to Dr. Cassie Holmes from UCLA. Her colleague out of Duke, Dr. Jordan Etkin, has looked at this. I think for everyone, it's going to be a balance, but the idea is you want some things that are comfortable and some things that add some spontaneity and variety, right? So kind of what is that Goldilocks sweet spot? And so at a broader context, what Dr. Holmes found is that, generally, if we can strive to get about 2 hours a day of autonomy, so that might not necessarily be something completely autonomous, right, where we're off, doing 2 hours of things that we really enjoy, but things where we do have control over the way that activity happens. But that once we get over 5 hours of kind of leisure time, then we start to question, are we living a purposeful life, right? So that's more at a macro level. At a micro level, you're going to learn. It's clear that when we overschedule things, our brain goes into overload. So we're not really encoding that information. And then we're also eliciting, stress hormones like cortisol that just get us out of the moment. But having a kind of tapestry throughout your day of things that you enjoy certainly does seem to have some benefits, because then you feel, you look back at the weekend and go, wow, I really crushed it. Like, this was a really good time. And one last thing that I would add to that is generally when people practice this, because at the onset, it can lead to fatigue, like any behavior change, if you try to layer it all on at first, especially folks that are at high levels of burnout, like stage 12 burnout, like you want to tiptoe into this, right? But once you get to a good cadence, figuring out a good mix of, allowing some slack into your schedule, but then also integrating, some variability. It's kind of, the secret sauce there.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. We are a minute from the top of the hour. Tara says, thank you very much for this great presentation. What
Thank
made
you,
you
Tara.
interested in this topic?
So my personal story is I fell victim to the pursuit of happiness. Again, that's why I gave a nod. I'm still an IPPA member. And so for anyone that might be going to the summit next month in Vancouver, please hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to meet you there. But what I learned, this work comes from Dr. Iris Mouse out of Berkeley, but it's certainly been replicated by others, is that for folks that have relentlessly pursued happiness to this, extent that they started to ruminate on, like, how can I squeeze out even a little bit more happiness, instead of just really, being mindful of the everyday joys in their life, were leading to not just poor mental hygiene, but clinical outcomes. And I found myself in that state in 2016. I'd kind of over optimized my life, and then unfortunately my younger brother passed away quite suddenly. And then also I had been a lifelong runner, and I think I alluded to it. Found out that I had advanced osteoarthritis and would need a hip replacement and wasn't going to be able to run again. And so these two big events, because I had been so Pollyanna about happiness, I didn't have the emotional flexibility to deal with them, and found myself, quite unhappy. And so I discovered that fun was a useful tool to kind of pull myself out of that hole and develop emotional flexibility.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rucker. Thank you for being here. Thank you for imparting all of this amazing wisdom on us today. I know that we're all going to take it to heart, and there'll be quite a few more people just having so much fun out there. I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our audience members for joining us for our author talk today. Without your support, of course, none of this would be possible. And we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Below our live stream video, you can find a link to Dr. Rucker's book. So make sure you click that resources tab to access that. And thank you so much again. We look forward to seeing you all on June 15th when we speak to artist, photographer, and New York Times bestselling author Jamie Beck about her book, An American in Provence, and on June 28th when we talk with award-winning horror and Afrofuturism author Tananarive Due about her prolific body of work. You can register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I'm Brandon Adler. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Rucker.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for attending.